See this? This is a natural health product. Consider it like the equivalent of a dietary supplement. And today I want to talk about what it's going to take to bring this into the Canadian market, all the regulatory and compliance requirements for NHPs. Now, if this is your first time here, my name is Brian and it's really good to meet you. I've been in the supplement and food space since 2005, specializing in regulatory affairs and quality assurance, and that also includes natural health products. Okay, now this is going to be video 1 of 3 videos around the whole topic of NHPs. This first video is around licensing activities. Part 2 is going to be the costs tied to those activities. And part 3 is the comparison to the US FDA requirements, which one I prefer, pros and cons, and the overall strategy about getting your products into Canada. So I want to talk about the regulatory framework for natural health products, or NHPs for short, and it is overseen by a directorate called the Non-Prescription and Natural Health Products Directorate, or NNHPD for short. And obviously the overarching government agency of that is Health Canada, which is the equivalent of the US FDA, if you will, but for Canada. So I'm going to speak to Health Canada and NNHPD as equivalent, even though they kind of aren't, but for the sake of saving myself the hassle of saying NNHPD over and over again, I'm just going to use Health Canada interchangeably. Okay, so my point here is that in Canada, NHPs are actually under the subset of drugs, okay? Which is why you're going to see a lot more oversight and approval steps and involvement with the government of Health Canada versus, say, the dietary supplements in the US, which is very similar to a drug product, right? You don't have a supplement facts or a nutrition facts. You have a license number. Like, these are all characteristic of a drug product. So what is involved in getting the license? Let's dive into that. So you can't just go to a manufacturer, have them make this product and then sell it. You actually need approval from Health Canada, and they have to give you this NPN number. And as you can see, it has to be on the label before you can go to market. Now, what is involved in getting this NPN? Now, there are going to be different streams that make it easier to much more difficult in getting that NPN. But overall, let's dive into some of the factors that you need to consider. The first one is your ingredients. The ingredients need to be permitted in an NHP. And Health Canada actually has a database of ingredients. Now, if your ingredients aren't in that database, chances are you can't use that in the formula. Okay. That said, it's not like it's really difficult to get an ingredient into that database. It's just a time and cost thing, but it can be done. You just need to have scientific studies and human subjects of which that ingredient has been ingested or used in, and then you can submit that information over to Health Canada and they'll input your ingredient into that database. Now, it doesn't mean your product is approved. It just means your ingredient can now be used in an NHP. All right. Now, let's look at the formula. You have to reveal the whole formula. If you got a proprietary blend that doesn't exist here in Canada, okay, you need to reveal your actual formula on label, but also in the application form. And then you have to prove safety and efficacy. That means you have to go and scour the internet for clinical trials, safety data. You have to provide all of this, full text articles, not abstracts, all right, not summaries of the studies, but the actual studies themselves. You have to submit this to Health Canada as part of their assessment procedures. Now, Health Canada is going to look at this and they're going to review it. They're going to critique the studies, the weaknesses of the studies themselves. It's not enough just to show that you've got studies. The study has to be designed well. Otherwise, you're going to pick it apart and they may come back to you with adjustments in your warning statements, adjustments in your dosage, adjustments in your claims. There's a lot of back and forth involved in this whole process. And in some cases, it could really drag out an application because they find fault with some of your issue, with your studies or with your claim. And then they pitch it back to you. You have 30 to 60 days to get back to them and they have to assess it again. And so it can really draw out the whole application process. But just note that you have to provide the safety and efficacy report to substantiate any claims you have on your product, as well as the dosage levels, and making sure that none of this is at a harmful level or that you're using any sort of ingredients that could be harmful. Next up is your testing specifications or your testing parameters. You need to submit this as part of your application to Health Canada as well. And this is where they're looking at the microbial contaminants, the potency, the chemical contaminants, and more. The big thing here is that you have to provide this upfront. You haven't made the product, right? You haven't sold the product. You have to give Health Canada a heads up as to what your testing parameters are right now. And then you have to provide all your label content, okay? They want to see all the different claims you're going to make. They want to know what kind of packaging this is, if you have a safety security feature, what your expiration date format's going to be. All of that has to be provided to Health Canada as well. And what they do is they take all this information in unison and they assess it. And they'll come back to you either with more questions, adjustments on the label, adjustments to your claim, adjustments to your formula. All of these things could happen during the assessment process. It's a lot, right? Now, Health Canada has obviously tried to simplify this process. And one way that they've done this is that they've looked at hundreds, if not thousands of ingredients already. And they've created a list of monographs, if you will, pre-approved ingredients with specific dosages, specific claims that can be made, all right? Either singular ingredients or combination products. So when I say combination products, for example, let's just say there's a monograph for joint health products in general, that category of joint health products, and that category can utilize ingredients such as XYZ at these dosages, and therefore you can say XYZ claims. All right, this is all pre-approved by Health Canada. And so the Health Canada has created three classes: Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 applications. Class 1 and Class 2 piggybacks off these pre-approved ingredients or pre-approved category of products. And essentially, your application is fairly administrative. You still have to reveal the formula, your label text, and all this other information and the testing parameters. But for the most part, the general approach is you're saying to Health Canada is like, hey, I'm just going to attest to your monograph. I'm just going to attest to your pre-approved ingredients. Here's my claim. It's a copy and paste of what was approved. Here's a dosage. It's within the dosage that you've approved. And then it speeds up the whole process of application. Ideally, getting your NPN number within a couple months. Okay, that's Class 1 and Class 2. Class 3 is where you might have a very unique formula, unique ingredients, or maybe the dosages of the ingredients that you're using is outside the scope of what was pre-approved in the monographs by Health Canada. And as a result, it falls into this third class of applications, which, as I alluded to earlier, it could take a really long time to get an NPN. And I think the vast majority of people out there want a Class 3 NPN because they don't want a copycat product, right? Otherwise, your product is going to look like all the other products out there, same claim, same dosage, right? Same warning statement, same packaging for the most part. There's nothing unique about it. And so Class 3 is kind of where a lot of people want to go. Unfortunately, the time and effort and consulting fees and legal fees involved in putting an application together and all the back and forth communication, it's not for everyone, all right? There is an investment made. And we're going to talk more about costs later in another video. But it's important for you to know all of this in terms of what's involved, all right? Now, we're not done. Let's talk about post-licensing activities. So now that you have your NPN and maybe you're going to market, you're not done working with Health Canada, right? Because chances are you might want to do a formula change. Maybe you want to optimize the ingredients. You want to optimize the flavor. Maybe you want to swap some stuff out to make the formula a little bit better from a margin standpoint. Well, guess what? Some of these things might impact your license. Either that means you have to scrap your existing NPN number, or you have to notify Health Canada of these changes. And on top of it, just because you're notifying it doesn't mean they have no objections to it. They might come back and have some questions or mandate other labeling requirements as a result. All right. So just know that there are post-licensing activities that you have to be aware of. And this could also include changes to your manufacturer, right? Maybe you are using a different manufacturer than when you first apply. Well, that needs to be notified as well to Health Canada or NHPD. So there's a lot of activities that you have to consider even after you've got the NPN. And one more for you, and this is a heavy one, and that is you need stability data. Now, if you look at this product, it's got an EXP date, expiry date. And in the natural health product regulations, you need to substantiate that EXP date. And you need to substantiate that with data, with scientific data. That means you have to get this tested at time points across, whatever your shelf life is. If it's 2 years, you need data across those 2 years to prove that your shelf life is legitimate. Okay, and you have to provide that to Health Canada at whenever they ask you for it. They might not ask you right now for it, but eventually they might ask you for that information. You have to be at the ready to provide that information. It's not cheap, right? Because you're doing full testing at several time points across those 2 years, and each time point costs, a couple $1,000, $3,000, $5,000, depending on how many ingredients are in your formula, the type of formula it is, and the nature of the test itself. You multiply that by 6 or 7 time points, it adds up. And we're not even talking about what happens if a test result comes back and it's not something that you wanted, and out of a spec result or something that is a failure. It's not a good day. Okay, so just know that there are activities that could impact your product even though you got the NPN. Now, it's not just the product you have to be concerned about. There are licensing activities if you want to use a manufacturer. The manufacturer needs to be licensed by Health Canada, and it's not just a matter of them updating a database and submitting that information to Health Canada. They actually have to submit SOPs, certifications for Health Canada to assess and approve that manufacturer and give them a site license. All right. Now, this is more for the manufacturers that are located in Canada, but let's just say you want to import a product. Maybe you're like, hey, well, why can't I just get it made in China or made in the US and then ship product over here? Well, first of all this other stuff still applies on the licensing component. But Health Canada has realized, okay, well, if you're going to be importing product, well, we need to keep you accountable and make sure that any product that you're importing meets all the regulations and requirements. And so they're putting all the accountability and liability on the importer. All right. So that means if there's any issue with testing, if they need stability data, if they need your test results, if they need your label text and applications, it all comes down to that importer. All right. And on top of it, the importer needs a site license as well in order to import. Just like how a manufacturer needs a site license to make product, the importer needs a site license to import product. All right. And so now you have to go after the US or the international manufacturer, go after them for the applicable documentation, SOPs, certifications, and provide that to Health Canada. It's a lot. Now, that's the what of it all, as in what's involved in getting your product into market with Health Canada. But then there's the other question, like the how. In particular, how much is all of this going to cost you? And I'd recommend that you check out this video to answer that exact question. Until then, cheers.